On my birthday, as the last off-key to you still rattled the room, my daughter leaned in and whispered, "I wish you were gone," like an ice cube down my spine. So I went upstairs and pulled out my suitcase. Buttercream smudged the knife, candle wax puddled on the Costco sheet cake, and the helium balloons brushed the ceiling like they were trying to escape too. Her Prosecco breath warmed my ear while the words froze me in place. The applause died into an awkward clatter of paper plates. I remember the dog's collar jangling louder than anyone's voice. In my room, the closet smelled of cedar and the lavender sachet my sister sent from Vermont. A small mercy as I slid hangers and chose a sweater that wouldn't wrinkle. The zipper's rasp felt like a verdict, each tooth locking in a decision I should have made years ago. Downstairs, ESPN murmured over someone stacking solo cups, and my grandson's laughter flickered, unsure, then went out. I caught my face in the mirror, 66, Diane Miller, chin set, eyes bright with something between terror and relief. The suitcase wheels thumped the baseboards like a heartbeat. When I reached the hallway, she stood there with a hostess smile that didn't reach her eyes, mascara perfect, jaw tight as a padlock. "Are you really doing this?" she hissed, and every guest pretended to study the veggie platter like it held answers. "You asked me to be gone," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. "I'm giving you your wish." The January sun threw a cold gold across the rug, and for the first time all night, I felt warmth on my own skin. The silence had a weight you could set on the counter next to the cake knife. You want to know how a mother becomes the kind of woman her own child wants erased? I'll tell you how a lifetime of double shifts, unreturned calls, tiny cuts, and one hard boundary finally pressed us to this edge. I'll tell you about the truth I spoke that morning, the favor I refused, and the secret I carried that made me the villain in her story. I'll show you the moments I missed and the ones I chose, and how love can sour when it's poured from an empty cup. If you believe a woman deserves dignity and a second chance, subscribe to follow the rest of this story. The silence had a weight you could set on the counter next to the cake knife. I felt everyone's eyes slide past me, as if I were a glare on glass. Lauren's breath was sweet with Prosecco and the peppermint she always kept in her purse. "So I don't smell like happy hour," she used to joke. Her laugh was the kind that made strangers look up in restaurants, bright and confident. I had loved that about her once. Now it made me feel like the soft furniture she rearranged whenever she needed a new view. "I'm giving you your wish," I told her, fingers tightening around the suitcase handle until the plastic creaked. Behind her, someone squeezed the helium balloons, and they squeaked their complaint. ESPN rolled through another highlight reel in the living room. Muffled, the announcer's voice dipped in honey. My grandson's Lego castle stood abandoned on the carpet. A dragon and knight both knocked sideways like they'd fainted mid-duel. Moose's collar jingled from under the dining table, and I watched his head tilt, that faithful little triangle of attention he always saved for me. I went to the hall closet for my coat. The cedar smell followed me there, soothing and foreboding. I slid my arms into the sleeves as if into a tunnel. The January sun outside was that peculiar Massachusetts gold that makes everything look briefly like a painting if you don't stay in it long enough to feel your teeth chatter. I could see the driveway through the side light window, the dusting of salt that had been tracked in by all the boots, melting into gray prints on the entry rug. For a second, I thought of the boots that had come and gone over these floors for the last 5 years. Soccer cleats, tiny ballet slippers, my own sensible sneakers, and then this parade of guests who had gathered to celebrate me. The irony tasted like tin in my mouth. "Mom." Lauren's voice flattened, that hostess smile slipping. She happens to be very good at that smile. It's the one she uses when a server forgets her order and she's decided to be gracious but memorable. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, jaw tight so as not to show the guests a scene. "You don't have to go. You're being dramatic." "You asked me to be gone," I repeated. I kept my voice low, steady. My mother had taught me that. Never raise your voice in front of people who will remember it on your worst day. "I heard you." She blinked, lashes like little black ticks against her skin. "You're twisting things, like you always do." like I always do. The words rested heavy, familiar. For years, that was the tune she hummed behind everything I said. She set her glass down so carefully that I knew something inside her had cracked. "What am I supposed to tell people?" she asked, her fingers tapping the counter once, twice. "Tell them you wished. Tell them I listened," I said, and opened the door. The cold bit my cheeks, and the air smelled like wet leaves and car exhaust and that metallic edge that comes off the river when the wind has been playing with ice. I hauled the suitcase down the steps. My hands shook, not from the weight. The Honda's door protested with its usual little groan. I slid in, put my palms on the steering wheel, and rested my forehead there for a moment. My breath fogged the dashboard. From inside, a chorus of polite laughter rose, the party correcting itself, and then I heard Moose's whine, high and questioning. I closed my eyes against that sound. Moose was good at forgiveness. People were not. When I backed out, Lauren didn't come to the storm door. I had a clear view down the street, snow-packed in the gutters, the plows having made a low wall along the edges like we lived in a tiny white fortress. A teenager in a Red Sox hoodie shuffled past, head bent to his phone, and lifted a mittened hand in a vague wave the way people do when they know you live nearby but don't remember your name. I raised my hand back and wondered if he would remember this moment when he was older, how I had looked driving away on the day with the cake and the bright little candles. I drove without telling the car where it was going, but our feet know paths, our minds refuse. By the time I realized, I was on Speen Street, past the Dunkin' with the drive-through that loops too close to the intersection. I pulled in anyway. The line of cars inched forward, and the menu boards buzzed like they were apologizing. When it was my turn, I ordered a medium regular, 2 creams, 2 sugars, the way I always had since the days when caffeine felt like survival and sweetness was something I could control. "Anything else?" the speaker asked. "No," I said. And then, because I was 50% habit and 50% softness, "Actually, a plain bagel with extra butter, please." On the mornings I had to be out of the house by 5 to make a double shift, that bagel had sat warm on the passenger seat, a small mercy to my hands and body. My hands, these hands that had changed 1,000 sheets, pulled 1,000 trays, signed permission slips and checks with a pen that had to be coaxed back to life by scribbling on the backs of envelopes. These hands that had held Lauren as she screamed with fever and as she screamed with teenage anger and as she whispered, marrying the two tonight, a child's cruelty wearing adult perfume. I parked under a bare maple whose branches scratched the winter sky and pressed my forehead to the window for a moment, the cold an anchor. I took a sip of coffee, burned my tongue in just that familiar way, and it felt like I was sitting again in the parking lot of the hospital in Newton after long nights, watching the sunrise slap orange onto the brick and thinking, "You've made it one more day, Diane Miller. You made it." I called my sister. Or rather, I called my sister's voicemail. "Hey," I said, my voice catching in the first syllable. "I left. Don't be mad, Em. Lauren said—" I paused and looked up at the strips of icicles along the Dunkin' awning. "It's my birthday. She said she wished I were gone. So I went. I'm okay. I'm going to get a room at the Red Roof by the Pike and figure out— I don't know. Can you pick up if—" My voice buckled. "I'll text you the room number. Love you." I clicked off and sat with my hands in my lap, the bagel untouched, the butter seeping through the bag and marking the paper like a small heart. When Lauren was born, the nurse handed her to me wrapped tight as a burrito, and I thought, this is the light thing that will change the heft of everything. I had been 20 years old, and sure I would be different than my mother who measured love by chores completed and meatloaf slices cut evenly. I had held that slick, wailing creature and thought I would never let the world make her hard. I didn't know then that hardness comes in forms you can't see. The bills that arrive in a month when your hours are cut, the cough that won't go away because you can't afford to get it checked, the check that bounces on Christmas Eve. I didn't know you don't get to choose the hardness. It chooses you, and your choice is only whether you meet it with a face that scares your child or with one that tells her it's okay even when it isn't. Lauren's father wasn't there when she was born. He was across town in a triple-decker with a back porch sagging like an eyelid, sleeping off a night with friends who thought they were princes in a kingdom that required no taxes. He was charming. He was a guitar and a laugh and hope with a hole in its pocket. I loved him because I was 19 and because he promised me things, and promises taste like candy when you've never learned the nutritional labels of life. He showed up 3 days later with flowers and a poem he'd written on a napkin, and I let him in because that's what the girls in the movies do. He told me we'd be a family, and for a while we were, in that on and off way that looks like a strobe light. You see enough light that you convince yourself you're not standing in a dark room. He left for good on a March morning when the snow had turned to dirty slush and Lauren had a rash so bad she wouldn't stop crying. He put his tote bag over his shoulder and said he needed to find himself, like he'd mislaid his keys, and he paused at the door like he knew what he was leaving behind. I had watched his back before, 1,000 times as he walked across rooms, hoping he'd turn around, choosing me this time. He didn't. I pressed my cheek to Lauren's hair. It smelled like milk and whatever sorrow smells like in babies, and said, "We've got it, like a spell." I learned how to juggle schedules with a pen clenched between my teeth. I worked days at the cafeteria in the high school, slapping chicken patties onto buns, scooping mashed potatoes into mountains that could hide lakes of gravy, reminding teenagers to take fruit and not just fries. I worked nights at the rehab center in Natick nursing patients who had been dropped by their own lives. On weekends, I cleaned the houses of people who used words like weekend place, who had mudrooms and laundry that smelled like eucalyptus. My hands cracked from bleach, so I slept with petroleum jelly and cotton gloves. Every Friday, I took Lauren to the library and let her load her arms with stories. We ate grilled cheese and tomato soup and pretended the kitchen table was a boat in a storm. I paid the oil bill late sometimes and the car insurance on time because I knew where kindness could be asked for and where it couldn't. When Lauren was in 3rd grade, she needed new cleats. She stood in Play It Again Sports, holding the pair she wanted, the good brand with the 3 stripes. I checked the price and felt my stomach drop like a faulty elevator. "What about these?" I said, reaching for a nearly identical pair with a scuff. She looked at me with the kind of dignity children have before they learn how to weaponize it. "I don't want someone else's shoes," she said, and I bought the new ones and made spaghetti with jarred sauce for a week and told myself it was okay. Back then, it felt like love could be decanted into small purchases. It felt like each sacrifice was a bead on a string that would someday add up to something bright. In high school, Lauren's contempt arrived like a slow drip from a ceiling. It took a while to notice, and then suddenly, everything was damp. "Do you have to come to the booster meeting?" she asked, as if I were a guest who had overstayed a welcome. "Do you have to wear that?" she asked, picking at the sleeve of my sweater with 2 fingers like it might leave lint on her. She locked herself in the bathroom and cried over hair, over friends, over the yawning uncertainty of being 16. And I stood outside with my forehead against the door and said, I'm here. When she asked about her father, the times were rare at first and then periodic, like a storm that shows up without the courtesy of a forecast. I would say, "He loved you, honey. He couldn't stay." It was the kindest truth I could find at the time. When she was 17 and he met her for coffee and told her stories about music and youth that made her feel like a character in something glittering, she came home and looked at me like I had kept her out of a party. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, and I had smiled through the small cut of that. "What would I tell you?" I asked. "That he was a song that ended?" It wasn't enough. It was never enough after that. When I moved into Lauren's house 5 years ago, it was supposed to be for a little while. She and Mark had just had Jonah. The daycare waitlist was longer than the line for Hamilton. "Please, Mom," she said, her hands fluttering to her hair like she was trying to keep it from floating away. "Just until we get our bearings. You'll have the guest room. We'll split the utilities. It'll be like a sitcom, 3 generations. We'll laugh about it someday." I told myself it would be a way to make up for the ways I'd fallen short. The Christmas morning where the lights went out at 11 a.m. Because I'd paid the wrong bill, the times I'd said I would be at her meet, and then stayed late with a patient whose daughter lived in Chicago and hadn't flown in yet. I put my name on the lease in the drawer and my heart into that house. I got Jonah to his immunizations and to his first day of preschool with a lunchbox shaped like a shark. I kept the grout white and the freezer stocked with chicken fingers that boast about whole grain on the box. I pulled the trash to the curb on Tuesdays, and I learned how Mark takes his coffee and that Lauren likes the dishwasher loaded like a Tetris champion. I walked Moose when I was tired and when I wasn't. I learned the creaks in the stairs like the notes of a song. The contempt in those years wore prettier clothes. "Mom, please don't tell the teacher stories about me," she'd say, a smile at her mouth and a sharpness in her eyes. "It's fine if you can't keep him Tuesday evenings. I just need to know so I can plan," she'd say after I told her I'd like to go to water aerobics once a week at the Y. "Maybe we can have less of your thrift store aesthetic in the living room?" "Clients notice," she'd say, smoothing a pillow I'd sewn. It was always framed as help, and I was grateful I was. She and Mark insisted on taking me to Legal Seafoods for my birthday one year, and I ate chowder and laughed at Mark's stories and watched her watch us both, the way she does like a conductor. When I signed my name on the check at Stop and Shop and slid my own debit card without asking, she'd put her hand on mine. "You don't have to do that," she'd say. "But thank you," she'd add, and it felt like permission to exist. That morning, my birthday morning, a Saturday that smelled like coffee and cold, I was at the kitchen island cutting strawberries for the grocery store angel food cake I wasn't supposed to see. It made me smile anyway, the ridiculous plastic clamshell, the memory of all the birthdays past where I made something from scratch when I had no business pretending I had extra time. Lauren was on her phone, thumb flicking. "The bank called," she said. "I have a meeting Tuesday. You can come if you want." "I thought you and Mark were going," I said, slicing through a berry, its white center like a small secret. "They want a co-signer, just for a year, 12 months. The boutique is this close," she said, pinching her thumb and index finger. "Wellesley Center is perfect. Amanda says the foot traffic alone." I put the knife down. The word boutique rolled around in my head like a jewel I didn't know how to value. For weeks there had been mood boards on the dining table, swatches of fabric like fallen leaves, candle samples that smelled like expensive forests. My daughter has good taste. She can make a mantle look like a magazine with 3 pumpkins and a fern. She has always had an eye, but I had eyes too. I had seen what loans can do to people who think they're bridges and then find out they were ravines. "Lauren," I said, and something in my voice made her look up. "I can't co-sign." "I won't." Her mouth tightened like she had tasted vinegar. "Why not?" she asked, her eyebrows rising fine and dark. "It's a year. It's my credit. It's my retirement," I said softly. "I have plans." The words felt foreign in my mouth. Plans. A silly little word, like little boats at the pond in the public garden, children kneeling to push them. My plans were not big. They were a part-time position at the library shelving books in the hours when the light is kind, a watercolor class at the senior center where I would paint bowls of lemons and vines on tin pitchers, a trip to Vermont to sit on Emily's back porch and listen to the peepers in June. My hands wanted to make things that weren't meals or beds. I wanted a door that I closed at night and opened in the morning because the day needed me, not because someone else did. She laughed then. Not unkindly at first, but with disbelief unfurling like steam. "Plans?" she repeated. "What plans?" "I put my name on the list for those senior apartments on Hartford Street," I said. And there it was, the secret I had been carrying around like a wrapped dish I was afraid would break if I set it down. "They called yesterday. A unit's opening in March." "You what?" The unkindness arrived fast. It arrived like a slap to my idea that I could make decisions worth defending. "Mom, are you serious?" "I am," I whispered. The knife sat on the cutting board with red juice gathering under it like an accusation. "I want a place that's mine, just mine." "You live here," she said, sweeping her hand around at the house as if I hadn't memorized it with my bones. "This is your home." "It's your home," I said, and smiled because we had had this conversation before, too many times to count, each of us trying to give the other a gift they didn't want. "It's time for me to have one too." She shook her head. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. The question wasn't about me, and we both knew it. With Jonah? With everything? You said... I said for a little while. I issued into the space between us. But it was too late. The words hit air that had gone hot. She picked up her phone again, as if she could scroll back to a version of our conversation that better suited her. Then she stood and went to her room and closed the door gently because she had the party to think about, because she had a frosting to whip. At the party, watching her lean to blow out the candles with me, our cheeks close, I thought of the first time she blew out her own candles. 3 years old, the pink cake sagging to one side because the oven had a personality. She had taken such a deep breath her eyes crossed and then sputtered into a laugh that shook her belly. She was the kind of child you hold your breath around because you're so afraid to miss the exact moment they're themselves. And then, of course, you are always missing it. You are always a second late because that is the job. When she whispered her wish into my ear that night as the room clapped, it was just another moment I was a second late to change. At the Red Roof Inn, the clerk working the front desk had a Red Sox lanyard and a voice that made you want to tell her all your secrets. "Long day?" she asked, seeing the suitcase and the smile that wasn't holding. I nodded because if I opened my mouth, I might have cried on her keyboard, and I had already done enough crying alone in cars. In the room, I put the suitcase on the stand and took out the lavender sachet from Emily, the one that had hung in the closet like a small pride. I tucked it under the pillow. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, old air trying to be new. I set my coffee on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on, gloves in my lap like small folded birds. I texted Emily the room number. She called nearly at once. I told her the basics and then the details, and then the parts that don't sound like details, but are. The strawberry juice under the knife, the glint on the balloons, the way Mark didn't look up from the grill in the backyard because he is a good man who knows when not to. Emily listened. She has always been my place to land. "Do you think she meant it?" Emily asked finally, after a handful of words that took the shape of comfort without being sticky. "She meant it enough to say it," I said, looking at the beige drapes, the patterns like waves stopped in mid-break. And I meant it enough to leave. That felt important, to recognize the muscle I had used. Leaving is not the same as walking away. Sometimes it is walking toward. I slept fitfully. The radiator clanked in old house Morse code. Somewhere 2 rooms over, a television laughed without pause. I dreamed of the house on Hartford Street, of opening the blinds in a sun that only I needed, of placing a bowl of lemons on a table because they were pretty and not because anyone was coming for dinner. I dreamed of Jonah's small hand in mine, sticky with jelly, and of Moose's warm weight against my legs when I sat on the porch. Morning came in one piece anyway, and I woke up with a kernel of something inside me that might have been relief. I drove to church because Sunday doesn't care about your personal drama. The stone building on Walnut Street had been my anchor for longer than Lauren had known. I like sitting with people who didn't need me to be their whole weather. After the hymn, I saw Father O'Donnell on the steps, his nose red from the cold, smiling like smiles repair tears if you do them enough. "Diane," he said, opening his arms in a hug that smelled like starch and candles. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He has a way of nodding that feels like he's making room on a bench. I thought of Lauren's whisper all through the service, even as my mouth formed the prayers. In the pew ahead, a little girl turned to look at me. Her hair was in 2 perfect puffs, and her barrettes clicked when she moved. She waved, spontaneous and generous. I waved back and thought, this is the world's answer to me on my birthday. The world says hello, no matter what your child says. It felt like a small mercy. By the time I finished my second coffee, a message from Lauren bloomed on my phone. "You left your blue sweater, and Moose is pacing. He misses you." I typed and erased and typed again. "And I missed you." I almost wrote before understanding that wasn't true. Not in that moment. I missed something I couldn't name. Maybe it was our bare beginnings when love was uncomplicated by debt and ambition. Maybe it was my own role, clear and consuming. I wrote, "I'll come by at noon when Jonah's at soccer. I'll get my things. K." Her text blinked back, A single letter with a bite to it. At noon, the house was dim with the particular quiet of after a party. Paper plates stacked neatly, a quiet apology. Moose bounded to me with such joy that I knelt and let him wash my face with his warm breath. "There you are," I said into his fur. Lauren was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, mascara free, her face young again, and therefore more dangerous. "You could have stayed," she said to the faucet. "We were celebrating you. People asked where you went." "I know," I said, unzipping the suitcase in the hall like this was a short trip. "I didn't want to make a scene." "You did." She turned off the water and dried her hands on the towel I had embroidered with a small lemon, because it made me happy to see it in our kitchen. "You made everything about you. Again. Again." The refrain. I folded the blue sweater, tucked it into the suitcase, and wondered how many times a woman had to hear a sentence before it became a story she believed. "I'm sorry for leaving so abruptly," I said, "and for my part in that. But I'm not sorry for what I said this morning." She spun, arms folded, an apron string trailing like a question mark. "And I'm not sorry for what I said last night." She looked at me full on, not flinching. "I feel like you've had a whole secret plan behind my back. I feel like an idiot." "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it," I said, voice mild. "I knew you'd make a case so good that I'd say yes and then resent you. And I am trying not to resent you, Lauren. I'm trying to love you like a mother with a full cup." She scoffed, but quietly. "Full cup?" she echoed, as if the phrase were pretentious. "You know what I hear when you say that? I hear that we, the people who rely on you, are just too thirsty." I breathed out. "That's not what I mean," I said, and wanted to reach for her, to tilt her face up the way I used to when she had a fever. "I mean that I want to choose you, not default to you. I want to want us." She looked past me then, at the window, at the thin winter light skipping over the driveway. "You could ruin this, you know," she said, voice small and terrifying. "The bank could say no if you don't co-sign. And then what? Amanda will think I'm flaky. Wellesley will go to someone else. Jonah will see me fail. Mark will love you," I interrupted gently. "He always has. And failure is not contagious like a cold. He will not catch it. Your son will not catch it. And you will not catch it from me if I don't hand you my name to spend." She quieted. Behind her, the coffee maker hissed like a cat. Moose put his head on my knee with a sigh that had the weight of a person in it. "You owe me," she said finally. And there it was, the sharp edge. "You owe me for the years of all of it. You owe me for him." She meant her father and all the holes he had left like missing teeth in a smile. "I owe you love," I said. "I owe you honesty. I owed you shelter when you were small, and I gave you that. I owe you my steadiness, and I have tried my best. But I don't owe you my future." She laughed then, but it wasn't cruel. It was tired. It was a laugh that had a cough in it. "You make it sound like I'm some villain," she said, but her eyes were wet, and I saw the child in her then, the one who used to argue with me about bedtime like it was a moral cause. "I'm trying to build something." "I know," I said, and I did. The mood boards on the dining table weren't just pretty. They were her attempt to make a life that reflected her. I couldn't begrudge her that any more than I could begrudge a daffodil for pushing itself through the last bit of snow. I have built things too. They don't always look like stores. "Like what?" she asked, her chin up, ready to dismiss anything I offered as patches on a coat. "Like you," I said simply, and looked at her until she looked away. She wiped at her cheek with the heel of her hand. "You can have the lemon towel," she said, a small surrender. "Take it to your Hartford Street place." She tried to say it lightly and failed. "You know those apartments look like dorms, right? You don't want that." "I want my door," I said. It was a mantra. I wanted my door. A door is a small thing to want, and it's everything. "Fine," she said, and the edge was back because she needed it. "But don't expect me to cheer when you need help moving your thrifted furniture up 3 flights." "I won't," I said. I had already planned to ask the ladies from church. They're good at casseroles and stairs. "You'll still take Jonah on Thursdays?" she asked suddenly, hope sneaking through the crack. This is how love moves with us, even in the worst moments. It looks for the holes through which it can pour. If you ask me, I said, and she rolled her eyes at the condition, but nodded anyway. In the car again, the suitcase in the back, like a passenger I'd picked up along the way. I thought of all the horrid things I had thought about myself in the last 24 hours, that I was selfish, ungrateful, dramatic, unkind, foolish for believing at 66 I could write a different paragraph in the story. It is not nothing to pull the stem of your identity out of the ground, even if the transplant is just down the street. The town stayed the same. Route 9 still churned with its parade of errands. The same man in the Patriots hat still stood on the corner with the sign for the tax place, flipping it toward the sun. But the world had shifted a degree. I felt it. At the light on Worcester Street, a young couple crossed holding hands, their arms wrapped in the leash of a golden retriever who looked like a cartoon drawing of a dog. The woman wore a beanie, messy and perfect, and the man had the kind of beard that looks like it could solve problems. They were at the beginning of something, and it made me ache and also smile because the beginnings are the only parts we all share. The rest is custom. I drove to Hartford Street and parked across from the squat brick building with its little square windows that look out on a small life. A woman in a red coat was struggling with a bag of groceries, and I went to help her because my hands always find someone else's burdens. "Thanks, honey," she said, breath pluming in the cold. "You new around here?" "Soon," I said, and it felt like the truest word I had spoken all day. At home that night, if you could call a hotel home, and for now I did, I made a list in the small notepad they leave on the desk next to the pen that doesn't work. Lists have always been my lifeline. Groceries, utilities, curtains, lemon towel. Talk to Jonah about the change. Tell him the truth small. Tell him the good news, that Mimi will have new adventures and he can help decorate. Ask Mark about the boutique. Make sure it's not a suffering dressed as a dream. Remind Lauren I love her. Over and over until she hears it. The larger conflict hung like weather in the distance. The bank meeting on Tuesday would happen without me, and whether they said yes or no would be its own storm. My move-in date would become real. People at church would say, "Good for you," and "Are you sure?" in the same breath. The ladies from my water aerobics class would pat my arm. Emily would drive down with her trunk full of the kinds of things sisters know you need before you do. Tea towels, candles, a plant you can't kill. Lauren would learn to live with her mother, not in her kitchen. The learning would not be gentle. We take the form the container gives us until we choose a different container. She would discover where her boundaries are without mine to lean against. I would wake up alone and make my own breakfast in a skillet that would not have someone else's eggs in it the day before. I would sit at a small table by a window that faced a parking lot and find the trees and the utility of it. And I would go to the library and shelve books in the quiet and feel like I belonged somewhere that didn't require me to fix anything. I put my head against the cool window of the hotel and watched the headlights smear across the dark. And I thought of my mother in our kitchen on Cabot Street, the smell of pot roast and onions, her back a strong wall. She had never apologized for wanting things. She had wanted them with a fierceness that made people step out of her way. She had wanted rent paid on time and our church attendance and vegetables with dinner, and she had wanted love, and when she didn't get it the way she voted for it, she taught herself to tally differently. I had judged her for that when I was young. Now I understood I had been in training. Lauren had whispered her wish because she has not learned where the edge of wanting is yet. She had pressed me to the edge, and I had jumped. It didn't matter if she thought she was the villain. I refused to make her my antagonist in a story where we could both be women doing our best in the mess. Still, in the narrative of today, there was a conflict, and I had prepared it like a careful gardener, pulling the weeds of my excuses and setting my rows straight. I was going to live alone at 66 in a small apartment that smelled like lemons because I would make it smell like lemons. And I was going to be the kind of mother who loved her daughter without dissolving. And when the phone rang on Tuesday with the bank's decision, we would sit at her table and drink tea and swallow the result together. Or maybe we wouldn't. Maybe she would cross her arms and look at the window, and I would look at the lemon towel. and we would hold our ground on different hills. Before I closed my eyes, I scrolled to the photo I had taken last summer on the Cape, the only day trip we had managed as a family in years. Jonah sat at a picnic table with a lobster roll bigger than his head, his smile so wide it might have swallowed the bay. Lauren had her head against mine, sunglasses perched on her hair, Mark just out of frame, but holding Moose's leash. The sun had done that thing it does on the water, where it breaks into 100 small stars. We were shiny, all of us. It's not that moments like that mean everything is all right. It's that they remind you of the reason to keep trying to make a life you can stand inside. I slept. In the morning, I would make oatmeal in the microwave and go to the Hartford Street office to fill out forms with boxes I'd check carefully. I would pick out a paint chip for the wall, a soft yellow if they let me, a color that could hold a lemon towel like a crown. And then I would go to Lauren's house in the afternoon with a small bag of clementines and sit with Jonah while he did his homework. I would help him sound out words. We would build a Lego tower and watch Moose pretend he didn't know he wasn't allowed on the couch. I would chew slowly on the silence with my daughter. I would not fill it with apologies that weren't true. I would hold my shape. On my birthday, my child wished me gone, and I went. Not because I wanted to leave her, but because sometimes the only way to stay in a relationship is to make room for it to breathe. As I drifted toward sleep, the radiator ticking a lullaby, I imagined opening my door in March, stepping into a small square of light that belonged to no one else. I saw myself set the lemon towel to dry on the oven handle, a ridiculous flag maybe, but one that said what my mouth couldn't say any better. I am here. I am mine. I am still your mother. And that is not gone. Not even a whispered wish could make it vanish. There's a thing that happens when the air gets too tight with memory. When one person's wish, spoken low, collapses all the moments that came before. My feet found their own way from that hotel room each morning, weaving me into the numb routine of breakfast diners and ignored glances at the grocery store. I walked through Market Basket, humming along to the faint Motown piped in overhead, letting my hands drift over apples, Honeycrisp, and Wax Bright, thinking how very ordinary it all was, the world spinning forward after the sharp edges of last night. Routine, Emily said on the phone, is what keeps you from falling. But my hands shook a little as I signed my name on the form for the Hartford Street apartment, each letter a small wedge driven between who I'd been and who I had to become. Every injustice, small as a splinter, pressed in on me those first days. The hostess smiles at Lauren's house, the way my suggestions for dinner or home decor were met with, "We'll see, Mom," tightly wrapped in politeness. The running tally of help I gave that circled back to me as enabling or smothering. The jokes at family gatherings, who's really in charge here, Lauren or Diane? Everyone laughing, but me holding the punchline in my throat. The evenings I sat at the kitchen table folding laundry, listening to Mark and Lauren debate vacation rentals as if I were invisible, as if my stories about my patients, my sister, towns I wanted to visit, were threadbare and best put aside. Each moment stacked atop another, a gentle weight, until my back curved a little more by the dishwasher, the dog's leash, the school pickup line, as though my presence was a tolerated inconvenience. I'd smiled and helped, and when I tried to claim something of my own, water aerobics on Tuesdays or an old lemon towel from my scrap bag, Lauren's eyes pinched, her lips made a line. "You know this means I have to find someone else. My life, a calendar arranged around hers. Love, a schedule, measured and revised." In those final weeks before my birthday, the tension coiled tight, invisible, but humming. Lauren grew sharper, quick to correction, her need for approval from Mark, from her friends, from herself, gnawing away at the soft parts of her. The boutique, the bank paperwork, the sleepless nights planning it all, translated into requests that never sounded like requests. "Mom, don't talk about our finances to Emily, please. It's personal." Or, "Can you just make it easier for me?" The shame was always folded into gratitude, a spell I'd learned to speak but never quite believe. I'd felt it most in the small humiliations, passing the teacher at Jonah's school and hearing, "Oh, you're Lauren's mom, the one who helps out," as if 66 years of living could be reduced to a helping hand or an emergency contact. Or after Thanksgiving, Lauren gathering leftovers and murmuring, "Take these, you like old-fashioned things." Her voice sweet, but her eyes saying, "Don't argue." The afternoon I signed up for my Hartford Street place, she called it a phase. When I offered to pay rent, she laughed, "No one expects you to," as if dignity were a luxury, not a need. On cold mornings, I took refuge in the red roof lobby with little cups of bad coffee and the lavender sachet in my coat pocket. It became my object to hold, my anchor, a bright scrap of New England summer tucked in with the Kleenex and chewing gum. Emily had sent that sachet across the green hills of Vermont, and it smelled like the kind of love that lets you leave, then waits for your return, clean and unforgiving. I pinched it between my fingers before filling out forms, before every hard conversation. I held it when Lauren called, her voice sticky with accusation disguised as worry. "Just let me do this alone, Mom. Just trust me for once." Trust. As if my life's worth, measured by signatures and checks, was a thing to be summoned at her need. The worst wasn't Lauren's words, not even her birthday wish, but the echo of them in my own mind, the slow, certain erosion of myself. Each apology I'd offered for being difficult, old-fashioned, or too independent, each silence I'd kept when my needs clashed with hers. Those were the true humiliations. Looking in the mirror at the red roof, I saw a woman with one suitcase, a stack of forms, and a lavender sachet pressed to her palm. I could not be gone. Not all the way. But I could refuse to make myself small. That knowledge burned and soothed. Emily came down from Vermont the day before my move-in. She arrived with a thermos of soup, a tart apple pie wrapped in a checked dish towel, and a look that said she'd already sized up the entire mess. We walked the path behind the apartment building, boots kicking at rock salt, the January air raw and sharp. "That girl's never seen you," she said quietly, tucking her gloved hand through my arm. "Not the whole of you. Maybe now she will." The cedar of her coat, the soup's heat, all of it warmed me past the brittle shell of my grief. That night, I stood by the hospital where I'd worked so many years. The parking lot was half empty, a shift change. The circle of cars moved slowly, headlights catching the glass entry doors, patients going in, others being wheeled out, the machine of healing turning on. I thought of all the ways I'd patched myself to keep serving, all the stolen naps on the break room couch, all the days I'd scrawled my name on permission slips between changing linens and charting meds. I thought about Lauren, standing at a kitchen counter, thinking she'd built her world from the ground, not seeing the scaffolding, me, holding it up. The ache was old, but it was clean. It no longer meant I would flinch for her approval. The morning I moved in, the Hartford Street apartment was sunshot and chilly. The super, an elderly man with a Patriots cap, carried my box of pans. "You got someone to help you, Mrs.?" He grinned, and I almost laughed. "I'm good, thanks," I said, the lavender sachet pressed in my coat pocket, my new key on the ring. The lemon towel went on the counter immediately, lemon side up, bright and foolish as a daisy. I ran my hand over it, the stitches a little crooked in places, the fabric thin. Not a flag of surrender, but of survival. I boiled water for tea, moving quietly in my own space, and felt my chest open wider than it had in years. Then Lauren called. I looked at the screen, let it ring twice. My body remembered the scripts, the quick promise to come by, the apology folded before I'd even made a mistake. I thought of all the years I'd filled every empty cup but my own. Not this time. Not anymore. I answered. Her voice was tightly wound, barely polite. "Mom, have you seen my navy scarf? And Moose is sulking. You could come by and check on him. He's not eating." "I can stop by this evening," I said, voice calm, fingers gripping the sachet for courage. There was a beat of silence so long I thought she'd hung up. "He misses you. We all do." Then, bitter or maybe bewildered, softer. "Why does it feel like you're punishing me?" "I'm not," I said, heart racing even as I breathed steady. "I'm making something for myself. That changes things, but it isn't a punishment." I heard her swallow. "You know the meeting with the bank is today." Wish me luck? I do. I really do, Lauren. It was not a spell I'd cast for her, only a truth I finally meant. No guarantees. You know, if you said yes, it'd be, but I can't, I finished. And you know why. My phone buzzed with another call. Emily, probably checking that I hadn't let old guilt move me back in. I felt split in two, but stronger at the seams. I'll see you at 6. Tell Moose I'll bring treats, I said, ending the call before habit could glue me to her wishes. That afternoon, I made my rounds. The library, the post office, a walk on Walnut Street, just to show myself I could belong where I pleased, as my own person. The overlapping voices of mothers and daughters drifted past me. Little complaints, easy laughter, until I realized I was bracing, waiting for my own child's demand, her gratitude, her disappointment. The shape of her want pressed against my choices for so long that my body forgot what it meant to move without it. At Lauren's house, the driveway was salted, the porch glistening with spun icicles. I let myself in with the spare key, my last act, I decided, using it before returning it for good. Moose bounded up, tail windmilling, joy unfiltered, and I gathered him close, letting his warmth anchor me to the present. Lauren stood in the kitchen, arms folded, her armor and her wound both visible. "No news yet," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Amanda says if this falls through, we'll just wait. I guess I'll just..." "What? Wait?" I stood in the doorway, fingers pinching the sachet. My symbol, the soft lavender, quiet and persistent, carrying the memory of someone who truly wanted what was best for me. The room was heavy with the things we didn't say. "Do you remember," I said softly, "when you were 8 and begged me to let you sleep at the library for the readathon?" Her eyes flicked up, wary. "I packed you a flashlight and peanut butter crackers and that old quilt, so you'd have something of home with you. I sat in the car until midnight just to make sure you were all right. You slept there, under the plastic stars on the windows, while I waited outside." Lauren blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "That was years ago." "I know," I said, voice trembling. "But when I think about letting go, I remember how hard it was for both of us, even then. I wanted to sweep you up and carry you home, but you wanted to prove you could do it. You needed to. That's what this is now, for both of us, wanting what's best, not just what's easiest." She dropped her arms, anger draining out, replaced by fear or maybe exhaustion. "If you do this," she whispered, "if you leave, I don't know who I am, Mom." I stepped into the light from the kitchen, the lemon towel slung over my arm. My voice didn't shake now. "You'll find out. And so will I. It's time." The doorbell rang. Moose's bark ricocheted through the house. Emily, always knowing when to appear, held a bag with a fresh sponge cake, laughing. "Permission to enter, or is this a closed set?" Mark appeared in the doorway, Jonah peeking behind him. The scene hung between comedy and tragedy, and I saw the family I'd worried I was abandoning. I saw the fullness of what we were: mess, promise, pain, inheritance. This was my moment, the big scene. A room full of faces, all braced for the next script. Would the grandmother apologize, the mother capitulate, the daughter forgive? Instead, I raised the lemon towel, a flag, a reminder, a memory stitched by my own hand. "This is staying with me," I said gently, "in my new kitchen. For luck, for proof that I was here, that I am here still. My door will always be open to those who knock, not to those who just expect to walk in." Lauren's mouth trembled. She looked like she wanted to say so much, and yet nothing at all. Emily slipped beside me, arm warm around my shoulder. Moose pressed close, Mark sighed, the resignation of good men. And Jonah, the future, looked carefully from mother to grandmother, choosing his model. I thought I might cry, but the tears didn't come. I'd already wept enough, over years of quiet dismissals and hard-won boundary lines. "If you need me," I said, voice calm and clear, speaking to them all, but mostly to Lauren. "You know where to find me, but you'll have to ask." There was a silence so pure you could float a feather on it. Then Mark, sensible as ever, nodded. "We'll help you move the heavy stuff," he offered, humility and humor lacing his words. And Lauren, after a shaky moment, nodded too, her voice barely a breath. "Okay, Mom." It wasn't apology, but permission for us both. It was, at last, a kind of blessing. That night, in my own room, I hung the lemon towel by the stove and put the lavender sachet under my pillow. I brewed tea in peace, the small apartment holding my movements and my choices. Sunlight falling just so on the table, the walls echoing no one's voice but my own. The phone on the counter blinked with messages. Moose missed me. Jonah wanted pizza on Thursday. The world, even in its most brutal rejections, was offering me a second chance. I opened my window to the brittle Massachusetts air, and the scent of lavender met the world's cold outside. I stood in the light, not erased, not vanished, just finally, simply, enough. I spent my first true night on Hartford Street in the hush of rooms that belonged to no one else. So keenly aware of my own breathing, I felt as if the walls pulsed along with me. As twilight deepened outside, I moved about the space in my sock feet, noticing all the ways solitude could be both a balm and a sting. There were no dishes already in the sink, no damp bath towel slung over the shower rod, no secrets murmured behind closed doors. There were, as promised, small windows that watched over parking lots peppered by puddles of melting snow, and one pale gold bulb in the kitchen that bathed the lemon towel in a circle of imperfect sunlight. For the first time in years, I was responsible for nothing but myself. The silence in my ears was so wide and clean, it nearly made me weep. I arranged my few things methodically. The lemon towel, folded and softened by so many washings, was the first treasure staked out on the oven handle. On the kitchen counter, the lavender sachet, warm from my pocket, scented the air with traces of Emily's farm in Vermont, her steady, no-nonsense love that came without a bill of expectations. I filled my little cupboard with tea, oatmeal, peanut butter, the groceries I'd chosen for myself and no one else. Each item, every measured spoonful and careful label, felt not just like preparation, but a declaration. I belong to myself, and I am allowed to begin again. Sleep came as it always does after a long day, but in the indigo well of night, I woke between dreams and checked my phone for messages, not because I was required, but because I could. There was one from Lauren, simply, "We're home. Jonah says goodnight. Good luck tomorrow." It wasn't a peace offering, but it wasn't an accusation either. Even the cold can be gentle sometimes. I pressed the lavender sachet under my chin and whispered, "Good night," back into the empty room, as if the walls themselves might carry word to those I loved and left behind. The next day brought sunlight, a rare, forgiving yellow that bled through the Venetian blinds and made the lemon towel glow like a lamp. I made myself tea and oatmeal, savoring the luxury of a breakfast with no small hands to rinse, no grown daughter eyeing my thrift store mugs. I carried my bowl to the window and for the first time took the measure of what I'd gained rather than what I'd surrendered. Outside, a hunched neighbor in a Red Sox hoodie scooped ice from the steps. I thought of the parade of boots that had passed through Lauren's house over the years. All the comings and goings, all the layered years when I'd tried to patch the holes in someone else's plans. I wandered from window to window, sunlight freckling the laminate floors, and realized, with a fresh, wholly adult wonder, how little I actually needed. A chair, a mug, a single good towel. No one to impress or silence, no one to smooth my sentences for. My only company was myself, and after decades of measuring my worth in the cadence of others' needs, I was startled by how steadfast I could be. I'd lived an entire lifetime as a supporting character. Slowly, I found the readiness to be my own lead. The bank meeting came and went. Lauren had texted hours before. "Not looking good. Amanda says we should try again. Still mad at you, but not as mad as I was. Hope you're liking the freedom." There was a grain in her words that I recognized, the first tender shoot of a different kind of connection. One without ledger sheets. One with room for anger and honesty to coexist. Without excitement or dread, I wrote back, "I am liking my freedom, and if you want pizza night Thursday, Jonah can help me hang my pictures. There's room for him to leave his mark. The idea of letting my grandson's little handprints, sticky with tomato sauce and delight, press into the newness of this place felt like a promise. Not a repair, not amnesia, but the next right thing. Emily stopped by that afternoon, her arms full of used novels and a potted geranium as brash and pink as a party dress. She teased me about the palace, inspected the water pressure, and insisted we celebrate, in proper Miller style, with a mug of microwaved cocoa and a slice of pie. We sat at my inchworm green kitchen table as the light slipped lower and she squeezed my hand. "Dignity looks good on you, Di." Her voice was soft but edged with pride. "Don't let anybody ever fool you into giving it away again." The Hartford Street apartments had their own cast of characters. Sylvia in 3B, who waved a can of Lysol in greeting, Mr. Raymond next door with his Red Sox cap, and stories about hippies on the Common in 72. I learned that routine could be invented. Sunrise tea, mid-morning walks, water aerobics at the Y. Library afternoons spent shelving books and swapping gentle gossip with librarians who called me Ms. Miller and meant it as welcome. My body acclimated to solitude, at first wary and then gracious, until I ached not for the old burdens, but for simple, chosen connections. Thursday came, and with it, Lauren and Jonah at the door, hesitant and hopeful. They brought Moose, who sniffed the corners of my kitchen as if looking for the shape of us in the new air. Lauren stepped over the threshold, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, the memory of that birthday still smoldering between us. Her voice was gentle, almost cracking, as she surveyed my kingdom of peace. "Smells like Vermont," she said, half smiling as she noticed the lavender sachet on the sill. "Emily's doing," I replied, inviting her in with a sweep of my hand. Jonah, unabashedly at home everywhere, tore into his pizza and barreled through questions about my building. Could he paint the bathroom? Could Moose sleep over? Would there be pancakes every Thursday? It broke something in me, that childlike assumption that love could stretch to fit new spaces. After dinner, Lauren lingered in my kitchen, sliding her ring along her finger, searching for words that fit the new world we were shaping. "It's quieter here than I thought it would be," she admitted, tracing the edge of the lemon towel. "Does it ever get lonely?" I weighed honesty with kindness, as any loving mother must. "Sometimes, but there's a difference between being lonely and being alone, Lauren. I was lonelier in a full house sometimes than I ever am here." She looked away, eyes wet, as Jonah giggled in the next room. When she glanced back, the hard sword of her anger had dulled, blunted by something softer. "You're really doing this." Not an accusation now, but acceptance, even a dash of awe. "I am," I said, smiling. It was time. For both of us. Lauren pressed her hand to the lemon towel, thumb brushing the faded stitches. Memory in motion. "This is really ugly, Mom," she muttered, but she was grinning. For the first time in years, I didn't bristle at her criticism. "Yeah," I laughed, "but it's mine." On their way out, Lauren lingered at my door. She stood silhouetted against the hallway, the dusk painting her hair with blue and winter white. "You know," she said quietly, "I think we'll be okay. I'm working on it, all of it. Me, you, the shop, Jonah, even the bank said to try again in 6 months." She hesitated, voice raw as new skin. "Do you think you could help me with the next round of paperwork? Not co-sign, just look at it?" "Of course," I wanted to say, but I paused, letting hope and boundary draw their own borders. "I'd like that," I said. "As long as you ask. As long as you know you can do this, with or without me." She studied my face, nodded, and for the first time since my birthday, I saw the girl I'd raised, the earnest, bright light that had once crossed her eyes while blowing out candles. "We'll make it work," she said, and she wasn't asking permission. When they left, the lemon towel fluttered as the door closed, caught by a small draft. I watched it sway, a flag of everything I'd fought for, a patchwork of memory, humor, resilience, and something finally, simply, my own. As the weeks unwound, my life acquired a new cadence. Sometimes, Lauren called just to say hello, without hurry or barbs. Jonah arrived with fresh art from my fridge. Moose found a sunny patch near my new rocker and claimed it with a huff and a thump. On Sundays, I joined the church ladies for coffee, found new books at the library, traded recipes with neighbors. The ache of loss faded, replaced by a gentle pulse of hope. The love between my daughter and me ran, at last, not as demand, but as intention, an offering rather than an obligation. Of course, habits die slow. There were days I caught myself halfway through an apology I didn't owe. Days when I missed the clang of a crowded kitchen or the applause of a birthday song. Off-key, off-rhythm, messy and true. But those memories became sweeter with distance, the pain receding like tide from a shore newly mine. And every night, as I turned down my bed, I pressed the lavender sachet to my breast and breathed deep. Emily's summer, my own mother's courage, and the wisdom I'd earned one hard, beautiful boundary at a time. Above my head, the lemon towel hung in the kitchen, bright and foolish and exactly right. A symbol of the choice I'd made, to belong, not by default, but by desire. To be present not as a shadow, but as a whole, bright woman. To love my daughter fiercely, but never at the price of erasing myself. My voice, once caught in my throat, found its way into every small routine, every stitched towel, every gentle no and hopeful yes I spoke. And my heart, battered but brave, learned that peace doesn't mean returning to what was. Peace is standing in your own kitchen, sun-wrapped and sandal-footed, at 66, with a cup of tea and a silly kitchen towel, and deciding with your whole soul, I am here, I am enough. If you know what it means to choose yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, please tell me your story below. Leave a comment, give this story a like, and subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to begin again. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do in love is let go and trust that, in the space you leave, both you and those you cherish can grow.